Welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I am very happy today to be welcoming Julana Dizon to the podcast. We have had some great connections on Instagram. We began following each other, and I noticed just like sending each other messages of support. And pretty soon I was really curious about the work that she was doing. So we reached out and have had some great connection prior to this. So I'm really excited to bring your story to the podcast. So welcome, Julana.
Hello, thanks for having me.
As we get started, I would love for you to just introduce yourself briefly, let our listeners know who you are, what you do, and what you're doing, how that intersects with the space of travel.
Sure. So my name is Julana. I live in Los Angeles and I work in entertainment, primarily doing like modeling, acting, and TV hosting, travel hosting. So my big thing that I kind of specialize in is places that you can go to see animals and have really cool animal experiences and wildlife encounters. So yeah, I go all around the world and I specifically seek out those places to share with people.
Great, thank you. Well, to give us a sense of who you are and how you've gotten to where you are now, I would love to understand maybe how you began being interested in animals and wildlife, and also how travel has become a part of your life and that you wanted to bring those two pieces together.
Yeah, so it pretty much goes way back to when I was a child. I always loved animals. It was kind of that thing that you don't really know when it happened. You just always remember loving that thing your whole life. So growing up, I always wanted to work with them. I wanted to be like a zookeeper. And I went to school for biology and I ended up actually doing that. So I was an animal trainer for several years right out of college. And while that was going on, and even in college was when I really started traveling a little bit with my friends, like just around the States first. And then I kind of, how I structured it at that time was every other year I would take a big international trip. And that's really how I started traveling. So, and then the in between years, I would just go on like little trips, like to different states and places that were closer. So yeah, my traveling really started in college and I would just save up all my money literally for traveling. But as I traveled, because I loved animals, the first thing that I was always searching in a place was, where do I see animals in Thailand or Belize or wherever I was going? And it's kind of really hard to find those answers unless, I mean, obviously, like the zoos and the aquariums will always come up.
Mhm.
But I knew that there were so many other experiences where you could see them in the wild, but you really had to do a lot of digging. And then I found also when I was in the countries, you kind of find some of those out by just talking to people, talking to local people. It's not always accessible like on the web.
Mhm.
So that's kind of how I started.
Awesome. Well, I love that you started working. I love that you had the dream of like being in love with animals and wanting to work in the zoo and then being able to actually do that for a period of time. We had talked before, two of my daughters are currently obsessed with everything animal. They watch Zoo Tampa, like that's their favorite thing to watch. And one of my daughters is very certain that that will be what she will be when she grows up. And I take each of them on a trip when they turn 10 years old and they get to pick wherever they want to go. And my middle daughter just said, I really want to go to Tampa. I really want to go to the zoo. So it makes me feel like that aspiration is possible, because sometimes you see things like that on television and as a child, you get these ideas in your mind and sometimes they don't seem fully plausible. But when you see somebody else who has actually lived that experience, then you're like, okay, it is possible. Someone can do that.
Yeah, that's awesome. What a great trip. Not super far for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know that you said you started traveling once, every other year internationally. Do you have a particular destination that really stuck out to you and made you realize that this was a way that you wanted to spend more of your time, was focused on wildlife experiences, or one that was really powerful for you personally?
Yeah, so two different ones, one for animals and one that's personal. My more personal one was before I moved to Los Angeles, I did a 3-month contract in Cape Town, South Africa. So that was the first time that I really went abroad and lived somewhere on my own. And it was a really like life-changing experience. You know, I always wanted to study abroad in college. I never got to do that, but here I was for the first time in this place and I was working, but I was like really getting to know the people and getting to know the culture. And I feel like 3 months is a good amount of time to really feel like you lived in a place and you knew what it was like there and you knew those people. And while I was there, I did a lot of cool things. Like I didn't do a safari there, but we did like shark diving, which I wasn't a super fan of. It was a little scary. But we also did like they have a beach there that's called Boulder Beach, and they just have penguins sit on the beach, and you can just go there and sit with them. It's really awesome. So that was the first time I kind of started to see like really cool animals in the wild, and also being on my own in another country and getting to connect with different people for like a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
The year after that, I went to Thailand, and when I was there, I visited an elephant sanctuary, and that was really important to me. That was kind of like a bucket list thing that I'd wanted to do my whole life, but I knew that it was kind of a touchy subject because, you know, anytime you're visiting a place like that, it's really important that you're going to an ethical one and not just one that's in it for like money grabs and touristy things and not treating their animals well. So I did so much research. Like I think I read every blog I could find, an article about these elephant sanctuaries, and made sure I picked one that like had, you know, really good reviews and, you know, was rated by like accredited websites that I trusted. And that was just such a cool experience. And that was the first time I really went and like had a GoPro and kind of filmed some stuff. Um, so that was kind of my first experience like documenting a wildlife scenario. So I have this like really quick 1-minute clip. It's not very good. I wish I could go back and do it now that I have like more experience with
Mm-hmm.
filming stuff. But yeah, that was an amazing experience. So probably those two places are really dear in my heart.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for mentioning the research that you did. I think that when we start talking about wildlife tourism and animal encounters when we travel, I think that's probably a more recent conversation where people are really trying to understand what that impact of those encounters has on the animals, on the environment, on communities. And so I think it's really great that you highlighted that that was something that you were focusing on. I think, you know, I've had experiences in the past where I look back and now having the knowledge that I have, I realize that they probably were not experiences that were creating a positive environment for the animals or for the people that were working with the animals. You know, there was many things that I think were probably more exploitive than something that I would choose to support now. And when I was 21 and I was traveling, I just didn't have the awareness that I have now. So I think it's so important to talk about that, try to share resources, like you said, looking at accredited organizations and see how they have, you know, vetted those experiences for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I really like about your podcast actually, is that everyone that you interview and you yourself are so conscious about travel, which I feel like is so important these days. Because like you said, a lot of people just travel and just are like, what can I see? What can I do? Instead of how can I really visit this culture? Or like you always say, be a guest here. And I love that in your podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, you mentioned that you went to school for biology and conservation, and then, you know, worked briefly in the zoo, and then you started to work in entertainment. So I would love to hear a little bit how maybe that transition happened. And then, you know, it's also somewhat evolving. So I want to kind of walk through part of your journey.
Sure. So I graduated with my biology degree and I applied for a job. So I ended up working for a company that we did animal training for like those educational shows at like Busch Gardens or SeaWorld. Like, you know, the shows where they have the animals run across and the zookeepers are talking about them.
Mm-hmm.
So we were training animals for shows like that. And we would do like educational talks, like animal ambassador talks with them around the parks. Um, and I loved it, but the sad thing about working with animals is that it's really low paying, like minimum wage, and at that time, minimum wage was almost unlivable for me in Florida. So to supplement that, I got a part-time job, and it happened to be modeling just super randomly. Like I never thought about it, but I answered a Craigslist ad and it happened to be a modeling agency. And so I did some jobs here and there, and then I started to get more busy. And eventually it got to the point where I thought, well, maybe this is something that I can do full time. So I ended up going that route. And I'm thankful for it because it really did bring me all around the world, and it kind of opened up my life to see that there's a different way to live where you can still do the things that you love, but also have time to enjoy your life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, I don't know that if I would have stayed at my animal job, if I would have been able to go to all the places that I've been and have all those experiences. But so I've been modeling for 10 years, and then I moved to Los Angeles 6 years ago. And once I got here, I got more into like the on camera side of things because there's a lot of commercials, there's a lot of TV film, and there's a lot of hosting here. So I started doing hosting, and at first I was doing red carpet stuff like movie premieres and events and talk shows and things like that, which was really great for learning to be on camera, and I enjoyed it a lot. But after the pandemic, I was like, I like hosting, but I'm not super passionate about the entertainment, like celebrity side of things, because at that point I was writing news stories about like famous people on TikTok and celebrity gossip stories. And I just didn't really feel like that was where my calling was.
Mm-hmm.
And for years, I had been wanting to somehow make my way back to working with animals or having animals more present in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So after the pandemic, I had always had this idea for a show that I wanted to do. So I finally started filming the places that I was going and really put it kind of into production in my head, and then got it out and I put it out on YouTube. It's called Wild Adventures. And that's basically what it is. It's a travel show based around wildlife. So in every episode, I'm in a different city or a different country sometimes, and I'm visiting a place where you can go to see animals or to see like a really cool wildlife encounter. But
Mm-hmm.
like anybody can go to, not just someone that's specifically like works with animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I have watched it a little bit, and I think it's so fun to just think about the ways that you can engage with animals as you travel. I think I mean, I don't think everybody is always thinking about that. And as I've traveled, I see there's sometimes experiences or I guess I'm just not intentional about it. The only time I can think of when I was really excited when I went to the Amazon and I was like, "Oh, I know I'm going to see so many amazing cool things here." And I saw nothing. No, I shouldn't say that. I didn't
Yeah.
see nothing, but I really expected it to be like in the movies or something where there was just going to be like, pythons and everything everywhere and it was going to be terrifying, and I was like really looking forward to that level of excitement. And I remember like one of the very first things we saw was a tarantula, which was cool. And there happened to be some snakes in the rafters of one of the dining halls, but beyond that we hadn't seen anything. And then one day we were eating breakfast, and this was one of the least exciting animal encounters I've had, but I was eating and there was these giant macaws which were beautiful, and one pooped on me. And
Oh my
I
God, it's so magical.
was so magical. And it's like the most amount, and it was like slimed me, and there's no real showers where we were staying, which it was really hilarious. And everyone's like, "Oh, good, thanks, that's bringing so much good luck to us." However, we went out into the river, the Amazon River later, and we saw pink dolphins, which
Oh,
are not something that a lot of people get to see. And so I was like, okay, I will take that experience of being pooped on by a giant macaw anytime if it allows for me to see these beautiful pink dolphins. But it's interesting because like that was one of the only times where I really was thinking a lot about the wildlife that I might encounter. So I'm usually focusing more on culture or connecting with women's social impact projects and learning about like the indigenous communities, but I hadn't really spent a lot of time thinking about how I might be engaging with animals as I travel. So I love hearing your stories and watching the videos you've created, because it just makes me realize there's a whole nother world of experiences that are out there when we're traveling.
Yeah, for sure. And that's one of the things too, it's like everybody likes something different. Some people are huge foodies. Like me personally, as long as I get food in my body to keep going on my travels, I'm fine. I'm not a foodie, but like I love animals the way some people love food.
Yeah.
So unless you're going to, like, if you're not used to looking for animal encounters, unless you're going to a place like the Amazon, Madagascar, the Galapagos Islands, where those places are known for animals,
Hmm.
yeah, you think about it a lot, but there's so many cool things, and especially in other countries. Like we were on our honeymoon in Belize earlier this year, and we stayed in a jungle lodge, and they had so much wildlife right around. It was kind of like an outdoor restaurant in the treetops, and they had so much wildlife that would come at different times of the day because they knew that that's where the food was, and they would kind of like, they had a fruit platter that they would feed the animals with. But like in the morning there would be toucans at breakfast, and then in the afternoon there would be these things called cotamundis, which are sort of like raccoons,
Hmm.
like all over the ground floor of the forest. And then at night there were these, do you know what a kinkajou is?
Mm-mm.
Okay, the cutest thing ever. You have to Google it. Like, they've been my favorite animal because we actually used to have some when I worked at the place in Florida. And so I used to be able to like take care of some, and they're so sweet and they're so cute. They're kind of like little squirrels, but they look like bears. But they would come at night, and they would literally come, like you would be sitting at the restaurant eating, and there was a railing, and they would just walk along the railing so close to you. They're the cutest things. But it is really cool to have these experiences where you can get really close to wildlife. But the other thing is making sure people are respectful of it. You
Hmm.
know, Fortunately, there are those people that just do stupid things around animals. And I think that's really hard for me to see. And it's kind of hard when you're in those situations to like say something, but like you kind of have to say something in like a nice way, because like you said, a lot of people just don't know. Like there are things that I did years ago too, like at the fairs they would bring animals and you would take pictures with them, and when you were 10, like you didn't know. And it's just kind of more in the recent like decade or so that we've started realizing the welfare of animals in these places and being more aware of it. So I feel like you can't judge people, you can only try to help educate them when you see
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. Yes, and I grew up in Montana, so I spent a lot of time in both Yellowstone Park and Glacier Park. And so the idea that some people think just because wildlife is right outside of your window, somehow it's like a zoo still, and that those animals are not actually wild, was something that was always such a pain point for me, because I growing up there was so keenly aware of what a bear encounter or a bison encounter or a moose, like what those things actually meant to my personal safety as well as to the welfare of the animals. But if you are someone who hasn't grown up in that environment and you just see all these tourists and you see the animals, there's something in our minds, I think, that tells us that there's a level of safety
Mhm.
because you're in a tourist destination, or it's a national park. It's not really a tourist destination, but it is. So that's been very interesting awareness for me as I travel and have even taken tours in those areas of how to have those conversations. That I understand you want the picture. I understand you're excited about engaging with this animal. And yet, like, there is a boundary between you and this animal. You can't actually be in its personal space.
Yeah, I mean, Yellowstone's bad. I've seen people get chased by buffalo in Yellowstone for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
But I think like the general thing that I try to get across to people is if they're going to go do a wildlife encounter or be around wildlife, like a lot of times you'll be on a tour, and you're there to see and appreciate that animal and kind of learn about it. And really, I think take away, for me, it's always take away the feeling of coexisting, like really respect for every other living thing on the planet, and realizing like how we all function together as things that live on planet Earth, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, normally you'll be a lot of times on a tour or with a tour guide, and it's like just listen to what they say and be respectful. It's like we did a sea turtle or diving with sea turtles in Hawaii, which is really common out there. But like, they say don't touch the turtles because that's a really, thing you're not supposed to do. And still there were tourists trying to do it. And we actually did say something to them because it's like, don't just blatantly disobey the rules of the country that you're visiting or the place you're visiting.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And again, I think, yeah, you just have to have those conversations over and over. And speaking of those kinds of conversations, when you and I talked before, we were talking about a little bit from the production side or the storytelling side of how do you capture an audience and tell the story that you still want to tell. And I know this is for a lot of people who are working in the tourism industry, who are working in entertainment, who are working in conservation, talking about sustainability, all these things that are kind of maybe weightier topics. How do you bring audiences in and still share that message with them so that you can send them home with a piece of that understanding of that respect and that coexisting that you were mentioning? What do you think are tools that you maybe use when you're creating content?
When I create my content, I lean more into the excitement and the genuine like love for these experiences. And then there's always the fact to want to educate. Like I want to be able to bring people with me and show them what it's like, but really like my hope is to instill in them kind of like an awe for nature and for wildlife because it's so fascinating. And pretty much what I try to do, like it is hard, especially with animals, it's hard to show things that are really graphic. I don't really cross that line,
Mhm.
but in my videos, I will say things about the places that I'm at or things that you should be careful of. I pretty much try to approach it from a positive perspective of just feeding little tips and things that people might not know because I feel like if you travel a lot, some things are very common knowledge to you and things you hear everywhere, like plastic straws hurt sea turtles, plastic hurts ocean animals. But it's not everybody knows that just because you know it, or
Mhm.
somebody might see it for the first time, or somebody might have heard it a lot, but because you said it in a video, something connected for them.
Mhm.
Kind of like, I feel like it's hard for people to really just be like, okay, now I'm going to be 100% sustainable. It kind of takes little drops of hearing it from multiple people over and over and over until one day they go, I think maybe I'll buy reusable bags this time instead of plastic bag. It's just,
Mhm.
it's very small steps. Um, so yeah, I try to just approach things from a positive place and a place of just love and education and
Yeah.
just hope and inspire people to like do a little bit better.
Yeah, I think it's so good, and it's so interesting because I think when we have these deep passions and we know the positive impact that we can create if we make these changes, we sometimes want to feel like, oh, I want to share that all the time with everybody. However, we realize at the same time that that will become overwhelming, and it's almost then you can't hear any of that information. And I've talked with a few other people that are also creating content, in similar arenas, and they are like, I would love to just talk about, sustainability all day long, but people would actually not come to me for that. They're really going to come to me because they want actually what you said, that awe and that wonder, and they want to see the beauty of a destination. And then while I have their attention, I can also talk about, you know, how climate is affecting glaciers or how plastics are impacting the ocean. And so then you've actually, by telling that story, gotten them invested in what you're talking about, because now maybe because they've felt that awe or they have seen that animal and they are really emotionally connected to it, then when you tell them the fact, it creates, like you said, that connection that maybe will be more long standing than if you just sat and created content with all of these facts that are valuable but not relevant if you don't have context for them.
Exactly. It's almost like you have to not trick, but you have to kind of just slip it in there and they'll subconsciously pick up on it sometimes. But yeah, so when I travel, sometimes things that I do is like, I'm going on a trip. Here's what I'm packing, but it's all sustainable. Like I use stasher bags all the time, or I just show people like little glimpses like that.
Mhm.
Because like I said, I think it does a lot to play in the subconscious. if they're just seeing it, like, oh, well, she lives like this and she talks about this sometimes, and eventually maybe it'll influence them a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's so great too. When you talk about preparing for a trip and packing, like you said, maybe my inclination would be like, here's the sasher bag. This is why I use it. Here's all the things that it could do. But you just putting it with your pile of stuff, like someone's going to be curious. And then because that was a self-led inquiry, it's going to mean something more to them when they find out like why they could use that or how. And like, I think that is so impactful to think about. And just a lot of people, we've had this conversation of how do we engage people in sustainability? How do we engage them in ethical travel practices, and finding that balance of giving them information, letting them discover information, creating the connection to it. So I think it's really helpful just to kind of keep exploring how that happens. One thing that I wanted to talk about with you as well, which has been really interesting over the course of doing this podcast, how many women who I've connected with who have had careers beginning as doing on-camera work, doing modeling, doing stunt work, doing something in the arena of the entertainment industry. A lot of people doing red carpet work who have now kind of like come into this space. And I'm sure it's because those are the people I'm attracting, but I think it's really interesting to see like how that has happened. And then also the other conversation that happens so much is that many of the women I've talked to have their own programs, their own adventure programs, their own YouTube channels, maybe small programs on PBS if they're lucky enough to do that. What I would love to talk about, and I kind of mentioned this idea, like even seeing you as someone who has gone and gotten an education in biology and then worked in a zoo, now that validates to me someone can do those things. What I want to talk about is the fact that there are very few women working in the field with animals, one, and two, very few women working in the space of creating entertainment travel programs. And I would just love to hear from you what your experiences have been, like maybe what barriers you've come up against, and if you have any ideas of like shifts that we could create to bring more women into those spaces so that other women know that they could also kind of break down that door. It's a
Right.
loaded question. There was so many questions.
No, I definitely know some of the answers. So that is one thing that I noticed right off the bat. I mean, if you look at the wildlife shows that have been on TV, mostly the hosts of those shows are in the category of white Caucasian male, or Caucasian male, I guess. And most of them are kind of like, very excited, like, whoa, what happens when this spider bites me? Or, it's like very kind of like shocking content. Or it's like a documentary on Nat Geo where it's very cinematic. So for me, while I was growing up and in the past few years while I was thinking about doing what I'm doing now on YouTube, I was like, there's not really a show that has a female-led host that is going on location, interacting with animals and learning about them and educating people about them. Like I found some examples, but there weren't that many, and I didn't find any that were currently airing. So I think there definitely is a bit of a hole there in that category, specifically for wildlife and women working in wildlife on TV. So that was one of the first things that I really noticed and that I thought a lot about. And I am kind of hoping to open up that door. I don't really know how. My first step was just getting it started for myself because I thought about it for so many years and there was always something that held me back. And I think a lot of it was that because coming from Hollywood and being on productions and being on sets and knowing how everything on the back end runs, for me, I had this vision in my head of what I wanted it to look like if it was on Animal Planet or Netflix or Disney Plus or Discovery. But me just being my own person, I don't have the capacity to make it look like that, because that requires a whole camera crew and audio and a director and a producer and all these moving parts. So that was one of the struggles that I had, was just figuring out how to do it on your own. And luckily, there are some girls that I was able to reach out to who I think you've interviewed before, who do the travel stuff on their own, like you said, PBS segments or YouTube. So it definitely can be done. It's a lot of work, and you just have to love that thing so much that you're willing to do it. And it kind of works out because the fact that you love it so much, I really get excited. Like, it is a lot of work, but I get excited doing it. Like, when I sit down to edit YouTube videos, I could go for 3 hours and it'll be like 30 minutes flew by because you're into it. So I would say the hardest thing would be just learning how to do it all on my own for now, or anyone that wants to get started. I do have a goal to start trying to reach out more to hopefully get more of a women community and help, people like you, everyone that you've interviewed on your podcast, I think is amazing. So I'm hoping to like be able to make some connections with other women. And I think just having that support group just to talk about stuff, even if you're still, filming and editing all your content yourself, but just to have someone that's also doing the same thing that you could, chat ideas over with. Is-
Yeah. I love that you mentioned, because the background of production, that when you started to envision what you were creating, you're envisioning like this like large scale production, or like that's what you're used to seeing, that's what we're all used to seeing when we look at television these days. And I was thinking about when I started my travel company, and coming from the industry very similarly, like I kind of had this paralysis of starting, because I'm like, okay, so the end goal is, running 100 trips a year, having this staff, having these people, doing all these things, and my marketing should look like this, and my this should look like that. And then I come back to my one, myself, and the things I can do, and I'm like totally dying, because there's no way I can do all those things. And then at some point you realize there is no way I can do all of those things. And that kind of gives you a little bit of permission, like you said, to do one thing, to pick the thing you know how to do and take that step. And then like you'll gain some skills, and you maybe will gain some connection and some other kind of support, and you can do the next thing. But I think for those women listening, or those listeners listening, this applies to so many things beyond, my starting my business and you starting, creating your content that you're creating. Like, when we only see this image of perfection that is at such an impossible scale, and we try to match our dreams to that, we will never get there. And I think our society has really set us up for that scale of perfection. And I think it's really important to know that anyone that we've seen didn't start there. Like, you even think of, Hollywood producers, or, large businesses, they didn't start here. They started here. It's just that we haven't seen all the steps it took to get here. And so I think that is a really valuable takeaway, hopefully for people listening. Maybe that will give them permission to just like do something wrong, or do something small, or do something imperfectly first, just to get going.
Yeah, for sure. And also not trying to do, like you said, everything, because I was the same way. I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down and map out my entire plan. And once my plan is mapped out, then I'll start. And the amount of time that I wasted trying to put my plan in place, when I could have just started doing the thing that I was planning to do.
Yeah.
It's like, even if you start taking steps in that direction, like a big one for me when I wanted to start making animal content was, I don't have any animals. Like, I mean, I have 2 dogs, but I don't, a lot of content creators and YouTubers that are big in the animal space live on, like, they have their own ranches, or they work at a zoo or something where they have access to animals all the time. And I was like, well, how am I going to do this? But I think that also helped push me in the direction of doing my idea of where can you see animals, because there's tons of people that love animals, but can't take care of exotic animals. They just love them and want to go see them and appreciate them. And it's like, once you start taking steps to that, then I am meeting people that have animals and I'm able to do collaborations with them where I can go to them and film some content and learn about their animals and share that stuff with people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so great just to kind of take stock of what you have. And then I also think that helps us understand what we really want to do. So for you, like that really helped you kind of niche down to where can we go see animals? Like instead of just like creating content about wildlife experiences and all these different ways you could look at it, there would be a million different stories you could tell. Like you really found what your story was, and that will be relatable to other people that have similar experiences. And I think that's another thing as entrepreneurs or business owners or storytellers, like there's an endless amount of things available to us. And so we really get lost in that. And when we can, again, kind of give ourselves permission to narrow down, find out what it is that we're really passionate about, and just really focus on that, we're going to be creating better content, experiences, etc., than trying to speak to the masses. And I don't know if for you, has that been freeing for you to just kind of step into that particular space?
So much. I can't even tell you how freeing it is because you're right. Once you get that thing, it's more like it fuels you rather than drains you. Because when I got into the social media space first on Instagram, I was doing what everybody does when they start. I was doing lifestyle and fitness and beauty and fashion and pretty much anything because you feel like you have to cater to the masses. When the whole time I knew that I didn't really care about those things as much as I care about travel and animals. And once really, when I started putting out my YouTube videos, that was the point where I told myself, this is it. This is all I'm doing going forward. And it fuels me so much to the point where sometimes I almost don't want to take collaborations to work on something else if it's not 1,000% organic to me and authentic to me and fits already into what I'm doing. Like if I have to go a little bit out of what I'm doing and spend that extra time in some other category, I almost don't want to do it because I would rather just take that time and feed it into what I really love doing. So it is really freeing and it's a really nice kind of break from just feeling like you're hustling all the time with no direction and no end.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, there's so many good takeaways. I feel like, yeah, we've obviously gone through all of this, so we're sitting in a different space, even being able to have these conversations. So I want people listening to like know that clarity does not happen overnight, and when it does, like you said, it's really freeing. But the idea for me that I was thinking about is, you were just saying like if something is a little bit outside of my lane, I really have to decide if I want to put my energy there. And, there's the idea that whatever you say yes to, you're saying no to something else because your energy is in that direction. And so if you are tempted to do something because of a monetary reward or visibility, or there's like all these things we have to take into account when we're in this space, then okay, those might be great things, but as soon as I've said yes to this other kind of energetic idea that's coming by doesn't have space to land. So if you're putting your energy into one direction, you have immediately like shifted and this other thing can't find you. And so I think it's really important. Like, it can feel so scary because we want to say yes to a paycheck, or we want to say yes to, someone who can help us further our resume or all these other things. But as soon as if it doesn't feel in alignment, it's a really hard lesson to know that we need to just say no. So the next thing can land in our space, and we can carry that forward. And then that will, like you said, kind of fuel us. Then that's gonna like bring in even more aligned things because people are going to be really clear. They're going to be like, okay, I know if I want to do this, Julana is my person. I know 100% she will communicate that story and message that is what she is passionate about. And then they know right where to find you because you're not murky. We're like, oh, I don't know. Sometimes she talks about yoga and sometimes she talks about, you know, books and sometimes she talks about hiking. I'm not really sure, but now like we know what to go to you for, what your expertise is, the story you can tell, where you're going to be most fired up, and then how you're going to actually attract other people to you. So I feel like it's a very interesting path, like when you're walking through that space of finding out how you want to show up.
Yeah, so interesting. And, you know, I think it helps if you're in a space where you can do that, because if you're just getting started and you're, you know, creating content for like trying for monetary purposes, sure, you need to say yes to things so that you can support your financial life.
Mhm.
Uh, but I mean, it took me like 6 years. I mean, I thought I would go to work and think all day long about ideas for this wild adventure show that I wanted to start. And I would just think about it and think about it and think about it for so long. And it got to the point where I told myself, if I don't do this year, I'm going to trash the whole project. And if I ever see a show one day on TV that is like the show in my head, I'm going to be mad at myself, but I can't be mad at myself because I never took that step to do it. I would just see the show and be like, oh, maybe that could have been me.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's hard because I think it's important for listeners to take away that it doesn't happen overnight. You just think it does because you see people come out of their successes, and then like I love diving into people's backstories, because then you realize that that person worked 10 years before
Mhm.
uh, that article or that trip or whatever that really launched their career. But it is so nice to just, like you said, if you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So you want to make sure you're saying yes to the areas that you want your life to go in those
Mhm.
directions.
Yeah. I'm really being reminded of the book, Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic.
Oh,
We were
love that.
talking about the TV show because she talks about in that book, she had this idea for this book. And this is not a book that like I can imagine anybody else would have had the idea to write. And it was very specific. And she just kept not writing it. And then kind of like didn't claim it as her own, or realized maybe it wasn't hers, and then she meets someone later who is writing this same
Right.
book that she didn't choose to write. And it was kind of that same idea, like these things already kind of exist in the universe, and if it's yours, take it and make it yours, and if it's not yours, that's okay, like release it to the universe and the next person will find it. So I highly recommend, if people are curious about what we're talking about right now and trying to understand, that's such a good book for understanding some of
Yeah,
these concepts.
anyone inspiration to get started on an idea you've had, read Big Magic, because I actually read that book right around the time when I was launching my YouTube. And that's what I thought. I was like, no, this is my idea. It's been with me for 6 years. I need to like honor it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've had ones that I'll have an idea and I'm like, oh my God, I love that one. Like, that is mine. I do need to put it on a shelf for like maybe 1 year, but please nobody else take it. It's mine. And like other ones that will come through, I'm just like, oh, that's such a good idea, but I don't think it's my idea. And I'm going to go ahead and just like redirect it back out into the universe for someone else to find.
It's fun to think about it like that too, because if you're a creative person, you have so many ideas, and sometimes that's hard for me too. I have so many ideas and I'm like, well, I can't execute all these. So you have to figure out how to sort and filter the ones that make the most sense for you and the ones that you can actually execute on, like in and do it justice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important, for so many things in our lives, and to just be able to kind of hone that skill of figuring out what's yours and what's not yours, is really powerful. Well, before we end our conversation, I would love to tell our listeners exactly where they can find Wild Adventures. And if you have anything on the horizon that you want to share, I'd love to be able to share that. And then I have a few rapid fire-ish questions to round out our conversation.
All right, so all of my stuff lives on YouTube. My show Wild Adventures, that's I just finished season 1, so there's 8 episodes of that you guys can watch, and that's just youtube.com/Julana Dizon, my name. And on Instagram, you can find me at Julana, and those are pretty much the 2 places that I live and operate in.
Yeah. And I would recommend, like, I have really enjoyed just seeing the content that you create. It always is something that makes me feel happy. And I love when we've been able to dialogue, which also makes me happy connecting with people. So I'll encourage people to find where you're at. Okay, so rapid fire-ish questions because nothing ever happens quickly with me. As you can tell, I love to like talk about all aspects of everything, but we'll see where this goes. What are you reading right now?
Oh, I actually just finished a book last night. So I have a new book I haven't started yet, but the book I just finished was by J.K. Rowling, which I was interested to read because it was like her first book not related to Harry Potter.
Mhm.
To be honest, I didn't really like it that much. And it was a big book, and I read the whole thing because I hate quitting halfway through a story. So I had to finish it. But yeah, it didn't really do it for me. So that was kind of a bummer.
I used to be that person that had to finish the book. And then I had a few that I read that I was like, oh my gosh, I am going to spend so much time trying to get myself through this. And again, me like committing to this book is going to not allow me to read the thing that I am supposed to read. So it like pains me because I think like books are magic and words are magic and someone put their heart and soul in creating something. But sometimes I'm like, the second half of this book was not meant for me and I just like have to put it back on the shelf. And sometimes I've revisited it and it will resonate differently later and sometimes it just reaffirms that that was just not meant for me. So
Yeah.
that's my thoughts.
Like knowing when to let go, I think
Yeah.
is really important. So good for you. I haven't got there yet.
It's really hard. It really is hard. I also never thought I could read more than one book at a time and I do that now too. So I guess whatever that means, that was my growth journey. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
Always all of my electronics, my laptop, my hard drives. I usually have a GoPro and a camera, just because I love documenting things and I love being able to look back on memories. So, yeah, I'm usually always either taking pictures or editing pictures.
So to sojourn means to travel somewhere as if you live there. Where is a place that you would like to sojourn to?
Ooh, I mean, immediately, oh, I want to go to Brazil. And I would love to live in Brazil for a while and like really get connected to their culture because when I lived in South Africa, I had some Brazilian friends and they were just the most amazing people. So I've always wanted to go there.
Excellent. What do you eat that immediately connects you to a place you've been?
Mm, well, the Kraft mac and cheese, the bad kind that's like really fake, that always connects me to home because I just eat that so much when I was a kid. We just like get a bowl of mac and cheese and watch TV all day Saturday. So and home, so that kind of always does it for me.
Yeah, that's funny. I have a really good friend who ate incredibly healthfully all the time, and that was his like total guilty pleasure. So every time I see that, like that's who that reminds me of. So it's funny how those things work their way into your lives. Uh,
Uh-huh.
who is the person that inspired or encouraged you to set out to explore the world?
I'm not really sure about that one. I can't pinpoint a specific person, but I mean, my parents were always big travelers. Before I was born, they were dancers, so they toured internationally a lot. Um, my dad is from the Philippines, so actually we did do like a month-long family trip to the Philippines when I was getting out of college, and that was probably one of my first bigger trips. Um, but yeah, I wish I could, but I can't pinpoint one person that really made me think like, oh, traveling's cool. I should travel.
Yeah, that's right. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't think I can answer one rapid fire.
You'll have to come back. You can share who it might be if it lands on you later.
I'll
uh,
comment on Instagrams one day and be like, here's my answer.
yes. And the last one is who is one woman in the travel industry that you admire and would love to recognize in this space? And it could also be someone in travel and entertainment as well.
Um, oh my gosh. What is her name? I just forgot. Oh my God, I just forgot her name. But she has been on TV. She does a lot of exploration stuff. Oh my God, can I Google it real quick?
You can Google it, and
Okay,
I can edit it down a little.
sorry. Um, Shoot, I don't know. Okay. Um, I don't know. Well, I'll just give you a different answer. There's a girl that I admire who is my friend. Actually, in real life, I know her, and I think you've interviewed her, Alice Ford.
Mhm.
She does amazing YouTube videos and content, and she travels the world, and she does it all as a one-woman show. So I have always really admired her, and she's given me advice and stuff before. So she's kind of someone that I aspire to be like and look up to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, she is great, and um, one of those people that is very much to see their journey and like dedication to this craft and storytelling, and one of those people that I also wish someone would just be like, aha, they definitely need their own show. So much like you, like I just feel like I would love to see your storytelling in a mainstream capacity. Alice is the same. Like I know that there's that she has so much to that she creates that's of value. So when we go back to thinking about breaking down that barrier, I really hope that we are not far from that, because there's so many incredible women adventurers, travelers, storytellers, conservationists that are doing such great work. And I think that it is time in our time in history that those should be some of the storytellers that we're being able to witness on a regular basis.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we are seeing it in the TV and film industry a lot, so hopefully it'll make its way over to the more documentary, unscripted section.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Julana, thank you so much. Like I said, it's been so fun just like being able to connect and follow each other, and then be able to have real in-person conversations, and now to be able to have you be on the podcast and share your story. I really appreciate it. And I hope that listeners are inspired by what you've shared with us today and are encouraged to kind of take a step towards something that they really have been like holding on to a dream but not letting it live. Like encourage them to let them do that.
Yeah, let it live. Live your dream. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I always enjoy talking to you. So even if we don't podcast, we should have to catch up in a couple months or so.
Yeah, thank you.